Okay. Good morning. Yes, there we go. How are you today? So today is the last part of comorbidities. We are going to round up today. There are many comorbidities. Remember, comorbidities are co-occurring conditions that happen at the same time as autism. They happen at the same time as autism. Okay. So straight away, I'm going to start with ADHD. That is a comorbidity, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I'm sure many of you know ADHD or you've heard about ADHD. Um, and we know that many kids, sorry, my screen still seems to be interrupting me for some reason. I'm just going to ignore that. We know that many children have trouble with thinking before acting, sitting still and focusing. But when it comes to ADHD, it becomes a bit more extreme. So the lack of concentration, uh, just being unfocused, being having difficulty just sitting still, focusing on something becomes a bit difficult, and it actually has an impact on daily life. That's ADHD. So mainly we're talking about being inattentive or not paying attention. So autism and ADHD have common characteristics. I'm going to touch on that in a bit in more detail when we talk about how autism is diagnosed, because there's something interesting there. I'll come back to that. So autism and ADHD have common characteristics like not seeming to listen when people speak, interrupting or intruding in other people's personal space. And there's no cure for ADHD. And yeah, I think the best thing that is done today is just managing the ADHD, managing the behaviors, coming up with strategies, and sometimes the medication is prescribed for someone with ADHD. Okay, so that's ADHD. If you want to find out more about that, there's so many resources online, so many journals, articles online. So um, you can find out more about ADHD. And then I'm going to talk about motor skills. Motor skills, I'm actually talking about gross motor skills and fine motor skills. Some of you who've done or who've worked with children in childcare, working in early stages, early years, nurseries, you will be familiar with motor difficulties. Uh, it's very important when we talk about motor difficulties, we're talking about some of the difficulties that happen in the development of a child. And the motor development is something very key as to show how a child is developing. So they look at the fine motor skills, they look at the gross motor skills of the child. When we say fine motor skills, sorry, when we say fine motor skills, what we are talking about are the smaller muscle groups, the smaller muscle groups in the body. And then gross motor skills, the larger muscle groups in the body. So some examples of fine motor skills, when we're talking about fine motor skills, we're talking about the smaller muscle groups, things like grasping, just grasping objects, trying to just put something in your hand like a pen, an object, writing, drawing, using a spoon, cutlery, using your fingers, your wrists. And then when we are talking about gross motor skills, the larger muscle groups, we're talking about things like sitting independently, balancing, walking, running. You see, those type of the larger muscle groups where you need more muscle to function, for your body to function, or for your body to move. And both motor difficulties in general, both fine motor skills and gross motor skills, a child may suffer from coordination difficulties in general, coordination problems. So just the body coordinating. So, right, it's a very gross motor skills and fine motor skills in a child are very vital in part of their development. So, as children develop, we expect them to have gained certain skills, certain motor skills, certain fine motor skills, certain gross motor skills by a certain age. We expect children to be sitting independently by a certain age. We expect children to be walking independently by a certain age. We expect children to be running by a certain age, to be able to hold a pen correctly by a certain age. So when this development doesn't seem to be happening, these are the things that are taken note as to the child is behind in their milestones. They're behind. They're not developing according to their age. They're behind on certain, or the fine motor skills, they're behind on the gross motor skills. So this area happens a lot when it comes to autism. In autism, you also find motor difficulties that affect the mouth. They affect the mouth. So there is one, for example, it's called oral motor disorder. And there's three main areas for oral motor disorder. And that is called oral or verbal apraxia. That's one. I'm sure you've heard of apraxia before, verbal apraxia. That is the inability to get the mouth to do what the brain tells it to do due to motor planning difficulties. Right. So the other one is dysarthria, and that's the inability to eat safely or speak clearly due to muscle weakness or sluggishness. So sometimes you'll find, because of the weak muscles, you'll find someone drooling, like because they can't move their mouth. You know, they have problems moving their mouth to do what the brain is telling them to do. Okay. And the other one, the trouble of to eat safely, the difficulties in eating safely. You'll find the problem when that person has to eat. There's a problem of choking. They can easily choke on the food that they are meant to eat. Even sometimes they might not be able to chew on the food, and maybe you have to cut it for them, or maybe there are other things that have to be done to feed that person in order for them not to choke. Okay. Then there's delay, the third one, delay in development of the musculature. Sorry, these are like big words. The eating muscles, the musculature for eating. Okay. Right. So yeah, treatment for for motor difficulties that affect the mouth involve things like strengthening the muscles, treating the oral, motor, and feeding disorder. So yeah, you'd have to seek, obviously, the medical professionals for help and support if you are experiencing, or if your child is experiencing these type of motor difficulties that affect their mouth. Because, you know, obviously by a certain age, we expect a child to be able to talk, to be able to eat, but if they're having delays in those areas, in the development in those areas, then that could be an indicator that they are behind in their development. Perhaps there's something wrong, and then you can get that investigated. Okay. So in autism, in autistic kids, there are varying degrees of difficulties when it comes to fine and gross motor skills. And I will put a link just after this video that explains in more detail about motor difficulties in autism. And that will be by a lady called Lauren Skankman. Okay, right. So the other comorbidity, which many of you are familiar with, is language delay, speech disorder, and developmental language disorder. So we know that, sorry, my screen keeps getting interrupted and it's really disturbing my focus here. Sorry, one sec. I'm not sure why it keeps on, I have to keep on deleting a certain pop-up keeps on coming up. I'm not sure, it's quite distracting. Okay, so yeah, language delay. That's when a child has difficulty understanding and using spoken language. Language delay, kunonoka kutaura, mwana anenge achinonoka kugona kushandisa mazwi kuti ataure. And if language delay doesn't go away, it might be a sign of developmental language disorder. It affects daily life and it makes it hard to learn to read. Then speech disorder is not necessarily language disorder, but it's when someone has difficulty pronouncing the words or making the words to sound as the way they're supposed to be sounding. And not all children who have language delay will have problems with speech. I think that's a bit confusing. Let me say, just say language delay is just when a child is having difficulties, understanding and using spoken language. I think that basically sums it all up to make it easier to understand. And it's very common in 25 to 50% of autistic kids cannot communicate verbally. Ndikuti 25 to 50% yevana vane autism vanonetsekana nekutaura, and we call that non-verbal. Vanogona kunge vasitori namazwi. We call it non-verbal. Ndo yatinotiyo non-verbal. And treatment for that usually is speech therapy. But then it doesn't mean that if your child goes for speech therapy, that they will immediately speak or that it's guaranteed that they're going to speak. It just means they're going to keep on helping you to try to improve the speech in your child. That's basically the support that they can give you. In some cases, sometimes it does, some children actually regain their speech in varying degrees, whereas other children do not gain their speech. But there are other alternatives that a speech therapist can introduce, which could involve the use of, have you heard of PECS? PECS, picture exchange, picture exchange communication symbols. I'm sure that's what it stands for, but it's basically PECS, or visuals, or pictures, signs, body language, hand gestures, Makaton. Makaton is it's not exactly sign language, but it's a form of sign language, but not the full-scale British Sign Language. it's another simpler version of sign language that is taught to some autistic kids, and sometimes they do grasp. Sometimes they do actually grasp some of the words, some of the vocabulary in Makaton, and they able like thank you, thank you. You can Google Makaton, and you'll see some things that can pop up that you can print out, and you can just, if you want to, to try that as well. But there are actually courses you could actually get online that will also train you on how to use Makaton, and you have to train your child as well. So it's all about encouraging communication in your child, because when a child masters communication through all the other alternatives, at some point they're going to understand that there is need for an exchange when they're trying to communicate. And that might do something in their brain, which will then encourage speech, or basically communication. So the most important thing is to have some communication, even if it's not verbal. Kungowana kukwanisa kuti mutaure munzwisisane nemwana, even asiri kushandisa mazwi, as long as achikwanisa kunzwisisa, as long as they're understanding what you are trying to say or what you're saying to a certain degree, it only can get better. It only improves. It only improves. Okay. So you'll find as your child gets older, those methods of communication, if you are consistent, they can improve their communication. They'll be able to even now tell you, I want to go to the toilet. They can just point at the card that has a toilet sign. If you have a card that you can print out online or draw or whatever, you can find them. You can find them all over the internet, to be honest. Just print out, or even find pictures, interesting pictures of things that are in your house, because obviously in your house there may be things that your child is familiar to in that environment. You could take pictures even with your camera and print them out. Maybe it's a type of food that they like, maybe something in the house, the toilet or the bed. You could actually take photos and print them out into little cards, cut them out, and you can even write bed, toilet. So then you can actually get your child to be familiar with those things. So when they want that, or when you want them to maybe to go to bed, you can point on bed. It's all about helping them and encouraging them to learn how to communicate, and the importance of communicating if they have no speech, or if they are struggling with speech. Right. So yeah, even body language is very important. Your child is able to, autistic children are very sharp when it comes to reading body language. They can read body language. They're very, very calculated, very, very smart, very, very smart. I know my daughter sometimes she wants to do something naughty. She wants to take something maybe without me looking. She'll calculate, like the moment I leave if I stand up, I'm leaving the room. She knows that, okay, mom's leaving the room. Now is the turn. Now is my time to do this thing before she gets back. So you see, some of these children are really, really smart. So they read that body language. And sometimes it's not nice for your child to see you in a bad condition, basically, like if you're sad or you're crying or something. I know sometimes things get tough, but try not to let your children to witness that, because it might put them, it's not nice for children to see their mother or someone sad, crying or depressed or fighting, arguing and all that, like we mentioned in the other topic. Because children read all these energies. They read the body languages. They know that, oh, these people are fighting. They know, oh, someone is not happy. They pick up on those things, and it can actually have an impact on them. Okay. Yeah, sometimes they use gestures. Sometimes your child will hold your hand, take you to where they want they want you to take something for them. They call it hand over hand. Sometimes you have to like put your, how can I explain this? Hand over hand. Sometimes it's like you have to hold their hand. So they use your hand as a tool. So you know, do you know what I'm trying to say? Like, okay, let me give you an example. I was helping my son to feed. So I give him the spoon in his hand, then I hold his hand. And then at the same time, I'm now training him how to feed, how to eat, how to use his spoon. Right. Okay. But yeah, there are also like speech generating devices that can be used to help speech, to make speech clearer. One thing I put here was to, you know, when COVID came, and in the UK, you know, everyone was told you have to wear the face mask, and the people with autism were exempt from wearing face masks. So if you didn't want to wear the face mask, if you were autistic, you didn't have to, because what you'll find was it's difficult to get someone who is autistic. Some of the children will refuse. They won't understand why I'm being made to wear something to cover my face. So in terms of communication, I found that okay, the parents would wear face masks most of the time. Um, but maybe the children, the autistic children, the nonverbal autistic children would have trouble trying to understand trying to communicate with their parents because they were covering their face. So I thought it was really important for the autism side of things to have been taken into account. I find in the United Kingdom, because they made it exempt for the autistic population, it was fine. Although the parents covering their faces would not be an advantage for the children because they learn by looking at the lips as well. So communication is not necessarily improved when the other person has to cover their face. So that would be a downfall for speech development for nonverbal kids. And in Zimbabwe, to be honest, I find they make it very difficult for the autistic population because they don't give exemptions. They don't give exemptions for anything, you know. They need to understand that. I'm just saying that it's important to understand that there are some children in the autistic spectrum who will not understand some of these things. They will not even want to wear things like face masks, have what you call it, the COVID tests. If you're traveling, COVID tests, they need to sort of make exemptions for this population, like they do in the United Kingdom, like they do in many parts of the Western world. They do make exemptions for the autistic population because some of them cannot tolerate, it's like torture, trying to force them to do some of these things that everyone else is doing. And I just want to ask whoever is responsible in Zimbabwe, please make exemptions for our autistic children when it comes to things like face masks and COVID tests, like they do in the Western world. They do that. It's all because some of the children who are autistic cannot tolerate these things. They cannot. They don't even understand these things. So it's just in those cases where it's really, really difficult. Please make exemptions. Okay, so I'm just going to move on to the next. Tourette syndrome. Tourette syndrome, or in short, Tourette's. Have you heard of Tourette's? I'm sure you've heard of Tourette's. I do not know Tourette's in Shona. I don't know what. Well, how could we say that Tourette's in Shona? My Tourette's. It's when someone has have many problems. Sorry, many movement based tics. Like I'm not gonna could I don't know if okay. I'm trying to explain it maybe in Shona. Have you ever seen a person who just makes certain movements, like just like random movements, but they might do the same thing, like, with their body, or they might say something, they might say something like and repeat themselves, or they might swear or say like some swear words and repeat themselves and they keep saying it and they don't stop saying it. Then you just wonder why. What's wrong with this person? Those are some examples of Tourette's or someone with Tourette's. So it's sudden, it's repetitive, and it's involuntary. So to a person who doesn't understand, you'll think they're making themselves do it. Kunenge kuzviitisa. Kune munhu asinganzwisisi kuti chii chinenge chichiitika. Umwe munhu anogona kufunga kuti this person ari kuzviitisa chii chaari kuita. Anogona ungoramba achingodzokorodza. They keep on repeating themselves. Or they might just say something like a swear word, saying, you see. So that is an example of Tourette's. Or they might just move their head like, they just keep doing a certain movement. It really depends what it is, but these are some examples. I hope I'm being fair to that description. 4 to 5% of autistic people have Tourette's syndrome, and then 9 to 12% have the tics. There's the sudden, some kind of tics. It varies. It depends what it is, and it is more common in moderate to severe intellectual disabilities. So, in autism, we grade them in 3. We've got, I think it's 2 actually. Yeah, it's mild to moderate. There's mild autism. Then there's mild to moderate, which means it's a bit more. And then there's moderate to severe. And then there's severe, you see. So it could be from here to this stage to this stage. So this Tourette syndrome is common in mild to moderate, that group. Okay. And treatments is to help a person to manage the tics. And then there's things like psycho-behavioral therapy, education, medication, reassurance, and then other resources and organizations that can help. And there are many comorbidities, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm not going to do them all. So I'll just name a few, the ones that are left. And please, if you are interested, please go ahead and find them online, Google, etc., and you will get so much information. I'm just going to run through the list because there's a lot, and if I have to do another video, we'll never finish this topic. So then what I'm going to say now are comorbidities, and then after that, we're going to end. So we've got tuberous sclerosis, TUBEROUS. Sclerosis, SCLEROSIS. That's another comorbidity. OCD, I'm sure you've heard of that. Obsessive compulsive disorder, that's another comorbidity. Developmental coordination disorder, hypermobility spectrum disorder, and Ehlers, this I have to spell, this is disorder and EHLERS. Dash Danlos, that's DANLOS syndromes. Okay. Then there's abnormal folate metabolism. That's folate, FOLATE. And there's also abnormal redox, REDOX metabolism. Then there's intellectual disability and developmental delays. Okay, that's very common. And then there's mitochondrial diseases. Now we're going into neuroscience. So what you're going to find is, if you look and study some of the things in the neuroscience field, they're going to be somewhat more advanced and a bit more a different outlook or onlook, sorry, but a different perspective, basically, from the medical field. They have a more advanced and a more detailed way of looking at autism, and you'll be surprised that because of their perspective in neuroscience kind of clashes with the medical perspective of autism, because the medical tells us autism is behavioral, whereas the neuroscience tells us very much that there are a lot of things in the brain that things like inflammation, things like cytokine storm, these. Anyway, let me not confuse this topic, right? So mitochondrial diseases, that's in neuroscience. Neuroinflammation and immune disorders, that's neuroscience. Neurofibromatosis, that's FIBROMATOSIS type 1. Neurofibromatosis, geez, now I can't even say neurofibromatosis type 1. Neuropathies, nonverbal learning disorder. So nonverbal learning disorder, we've mentioned that in language delay, when we talked about language delay. So then there's another one like OCD, but this one is OCPD. That's obsessive compulsive personality disorder. Okay. Then there's psychosis, schizophrenia. Then there's schizoid personality disorder. Then sensory problems, very common. Bowel disease. I think we talked about gastrointestinal problems last time. So under gut health, stomach health. So bowel disease would come under there as well, but you can actually research more on that. Okay, that's it. I think if we're going into more of that, we will never finish. So, right. So I really, really hope that this information is helpful. And because I know there are a lot of people who don't understand autism. And some of you might say these topics are boring. But if you are affected or you know someone who's impacted by autism, you're going to find that this information is very, very important, and it's very, very useful, and it's overdue. It's information that should have come a long time ago, to be honest. So please, please share this information with some of those people who are struggling. They will find some kind of empowerment in these videos. They will even it will push them to look into things. It'll push them to try to understand their children better, and they can find help. They can seek help for their children. They can learn take time to learn some of the things that are happening to their children. All right, so the next topic is going to be how autism is diagnosed, and I will come back again on the next video. And thank you so much. Thank you. I really appreciate those who are taking their time to watch these videos, to support these videos. And thank you again, and take care. Okay, bye-bye.